There is not.
Do you know what chapter in the kinesiology book?
22. Now we're rolling. All right, so my first slide says, what if we all taught someone how to walk? And many of us have kind of considered this before. And I don't know if anyone's in here who's a parent. You're a parent? So you're a parent. So you've kind of had your little bit of input into a person walking. And one of the things that we want to share with you is that if a person loses their ability to walk, that is their fundamental privilege of mobility. And so when they lose that, they are now required to be dependent, right? And so one of the biggest things that we want you to leave this semester with is your confidence in teaching someone how to regain independence. You all have that right now, and so you really enjoy that. And it's not until it's lost that you have any appreciation for what it would be to have it back. So this is kind of a big deal. One of the other things that we want to tell you is many of us are under the guise, and it's very incorrect, that when we do gait training, we are walking a patient. And that is not true. Gait training is just like balance training. It had very technical components to it that we need to use to elevate a person's ability to maintain balance. Well, that's what gait training is. It has very technical components. It's not just taking that person and walking them. If you do that, what you're doing is you're improving their aerobic conditioning, right? So let's just go ahead and make that our main frame of thought, that we're going to take that person and we're going to educate them on how to better gait, not just to gait. So with that, let's look at the first thing here. Gait is locomotion. So when you hear the term locomotion, you're just going to use that synonymously with the term gait. Also, ambulation is one of the words that we hear very commonly, and we use that. But what joint motions occur? So here's what you're going to do. You're going to take everything that you grabbed in kines, and you're going to start applying that here. So think about what happens with the toes, the foot, the ankle. You're going to hear me use the word subtalar, and you're going to think, I know what that is. You need to think about the knee. You need to think about the hip. You need to think about the pelvis and its interaction with the lumbar spine. You also even need to think about the thoracic spine, the cervical spine, and yes, your shoulders, your elbows, and your wrists all play a role in it, right? And your head posture. So this takes up everything. And I need to just go ahead and let you know, you're accountable for that. The licensure exam will want you to know what each joint is doing during the gait cycle. So what muscles or muscle groups are acting and how. For instance, in the second session, we're going to talk about very specifically something called deceleration. Now you've heard that term before, right? And we associated that with something in Module 2 in our resistance training module called eccentrics. Right? You remember that word deceleration? Well, this is actually going to get a term reference into the swing phase of gait. And so when we swing phase, there's a muscle group that's going to be decelerating that component. And it's usually the hamstrings that we're going to think about. So deceleration, hamstrings, eccentric, what are they doing? But then also, what is normal for that person? What's normal? And we're going to look at that today in our breakout session in lab. You guys are going to look at each other in groups of 4, and you're just going to watch each other walk. And maybe you've done this before. Has anybody been in Walmart or Price Cutter, or, well, Dakota's not here. We don't have to talk about Price Cutter. But you walk in and you see somebody, and maybe they're doing something like really unique, and you see them, or maybe they've got a little antalgic gait going on, right? And so you study that, and you look at it, and now you're starting to notice it. And it's possible that you've already, like, found yourself with that therapist mindset, and you study that, and you look at it, and you go, I think that's this, or I think that's that. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing. It's just what you do. I mean, it's just like an auto mechanic would see a car going down the road and see something wrong or hear something wrong, and they assess it and they know. It's just, that's who you are, and that's a great thing to be. So what is normal for that person is kind of a critical question. One of the first things I'll tell you about posture is I personally don't believe there's such a thing as a bad posture. And some of you need to like breathe a sigh of relief. Unless the only bad posture I believe is one you can't get out of. You're stuck in it. That means that there's been some hard structural changes occur, and you can't change that. Like you can't make your head look straight up. Even though you probably sit and do this a lot right here, right now, but what happens when it sticks that way? Right? So it's when it starts to get sticky. But what normal is for one person is probably not going to be normal for another. And you know what? I've gotten to know you over the last year and a half now. And I've watched you walk. And I know what I see. And I see this just in your posture alone. And so is it normal for you? And then take that and then range that into a hemisphere and say right and left. This is what it looks like on the right. This is what it looks like on the left. And then gauge that down. The next thing is, if it's not normal, is this something that's structural? Like if you saw me walking and my left shoulder is higher than my right, is that something I can go, oh, well, there you go. Sorry, I just sometimes carry that, I guess, that way. And you won't even know it. Like somebody's going to tell you something today about the gait that you're going to be like, I do not. I don't walk that way. I don't walk with my hand folded up like this. I don't do that. And the reality is you do. What are the goals of gait? And that is fundamentally to get them independent as possible and to keep them that way. That is a goal of gait. So when you're looking at this whole process, you want them to move freely. But then, what mobility aids? Now I'm using the term mobility in a global sense, right? We use mobility in a local sense when we're talking about the joints in Module 1. What's the global mobility complex look like? Does that mean that they need a assistive device, like a cane, like a walker, like axillary crutches? What is it that they need, and then how do we use it? For instance, what is the purpose of a cane when they don't have anti-gait? Balance, right? And it's used interchangeably, isn't it? They may go from one hand to the next, right? Does that mean that they should change the way they use it? No. They should still probably use that with reciprocation, meaning on the opposite side. If you've ever thought, why does a person need to have a cane or a single crutch on the well side? Well, it's more about reciprocation, which is what gait is, and that makes it more normal, right? So that's another thing there. You must cue and give feedback. I will go ahead and tell you that you're about to do the easiest skills check you've ever done. For me. Next week it'll just be basically you're just regurgitating a list that I provide for you. But I'm listening. I'm listening for how you cue them, what you say to them. And then also how you handle them. We're at a point now where it's very important for you to put your hands and your words to work for you. That's what a therapist does. So, that being said, let's jump into some of the key terminology. This is all in chapter 22 of your Kines text right here. So if you have that, like I know you're using that, and that's awesome. Well, I guess you're not. You're using my PowerPoint, aren't you? but you may have that text handy. If you do, great. If you don't worry about it. We're going to work through this anyways. The first thing that we want to establish is what the gait cycle is. Now, the gait cycle is described in your text, and you don't have to have it. You can just look right here at this PowerPoint. The activity between one foot touch and the time till it touches again. So let's just do this real quick. I'm going to make a left foot. And again, I'm not a very good artist. Right? And we're going to say that there's a right foot. And that would be a step. But the gait cycle doesn't end with that one step. You see this foot right here, it has to get up here. That's when the gait cycle ends. So again, it's a cycle though, right? So it continues. Activity between one foot touch and the time till it touches again. So you've got this to here. That is your gait cycle.
Of 1 foot, is that what you're saying?
From 1 foot leaving the ground to touching the ground again. That's a gait cycle. And then we subdivide that. And so it's really important for you, the student, to start speaking this terminology. Number one, you have a stride length. That is the distance traveled during your gait cycle. So I'm going to make another mark here. That is this distance right here. That is your stride length. Now, this gets kind of hairy. Just kind of putting that out there for you because now we're going to talk about a step. A step is 1 foot moving forward. It says 1/2 of a stride. This is 1/2 of that stride. Do you see it? And then we have a step length. Now, just so you understand, this is a measurement or the distance between the heel strike of 1 foot to the heel strike of another. So, I've been drawing some lines. Let me draw one more. The step length is the measurement of this distance right here. Maybe that's a 1/2 meter, for instance. But we still say this is a step, and the step length is just the quantity of distance measured. So they could be used interchangeably. Or you could just say step. What is the step length? The step. Are you all good there? It's pretty simple from that point. Now here's a word we've seen before, and that is cadence. If all I did in 1 minute was left right there, and I took 3 steps, then all you would do is say 3 steps per minute. That's the cadence. Now, what we're going to see as we go throughout the day is we're looking for a little bit of a change there. Like, we're looking for how many steps can one person do in 1 minute, right? Some of you have wristwatch monitors that tells you how many steps you've done. Like, I was going to look for mine. I'm at 12,938 steps for the day. There you go.
That is a lot of steps for this hour.
I've already got my run in.
Okay.
Counting on my run steps.
I'm like, whoa.
I have not had that many this morning.
Well, you better just jump in the morning runs there, Vanya. Another one here is stance phase. This is when foot is in contact with the ground. Now, here's what I want you to focus on. When we take the gait cycle, we're going to break it into two phases. Now, I know we've talked about steps and I know we've talked about strides. But that is not a part of the cycle as much as when we look at the stance and we look at the swing. And these are the ways we want you to speak about those legs. You have a stance leg, you have a swing phase leg, right? So, just on my right. You ready? Stance, swing, stance, swing, stance, swing, stance, swing, stance, swing, stance, swing. Now, you have to say it that way all the time. Like when you're walking. Maybe if that's what it takes to drive it in. But which one lasts longer? Well, our presentation here, as well as your text and most other texts agree that stance phase is about 60% of the gait cycle. Now I know that kind of seems like, how did they break that down? I'm not going to ask you to ever really think and put a lot of thought into that. I'm going to ask you though just to accept it. The stance phase is the longer phase. Approximately 60% of the gait cycle. The swing phase is just simply when the foot is not in contact with the ground. So when you look at our diagram right here, this is really bothering me, hang on. That's a little better. When you look at our diagram, this is stance, but this gap between right here is the swing. This foot would be in the stance phase when the other foot is in the swing phase. And that's just simply common sense for you. But, do you get it? Are you straight and narrow with that right there? Because we can't go any further until you're good there. All right, so there's some other terminology that's associated with that. And this is not divvied up into any specific nomenclature. It's just, this is what we say. A person's foot will have weight acceptance that occurs at the very beginning of the stance, right here. So as they step with their right, they'll bear weight into that right foot. That's the weight acceptance. And you'll hear us say that they have this going on during weight acceptance. Then the next word here is single leg support. That is when you have one leg in swing phase, we will say that they have single leg support. And so you're going to hear us say that here in just a few minutes. They'll have a leg advancement. Now, I have to tell you, I don't know why they do these things. I really don't. But there is a place where we advance the leg, right? And that's usually at the beginning of the swing. We're going to advance the leg. We have a time where they're in double support. You're going to see these here in just a minute. I have a nice chart for you. But that's when both feet are in contact with the ground, right? We're going to watch a video here in a little bit of Olympic speed walkers. Yes, I detest these people because I feel like they're not abiding by the rules, but that's okay. And then there's a non-support or a float phase. And this happens during running, where when we walked our 1 mile, do you remember I said you have to have one foot in contact with the ground and not do a float phase? Mm-hmm. Some of you are like, what's he talking about? This is what I'm talking about. The float phase means that both feet are airborne, which is the identification of a run versus a walk. And then you have the single support when one foot is in contact with the ground. Listen, I can't tell you why they go single leg support and single support and throw both terms at you, but they do. Your text does that, so we just have to cover that on both sides. Now I have some bad news. the licensure exam will expect you to know that there are two specific nomenclature characteristics. One is known as traditional, the other is known as Ranchos Los Amigos. I am not able to give you anything other than what I can give you in this talk right here. They will not be nice about this one. They're going to hit you on every level. And they expect the therapist to know the difference between the two terms. The biggest difference is for traditional gait terminology, you will see anatomical terms listed. And I have that for you on your chart there at the very top. You see where it says anatomy. And forgive me, this is pretty small up here. But under my traditional over here on that corner, it says anatomy. So make sure that you're really good with saying traditional is anatomy. Ranchos Los Amigos, they like to speak in timing. So when you see the terms, you just jump in and say, okay, is it an anatomy term or is it a timing term? And if it's an anatomy term, then it's traditional. If it's timing, it's Ranchos Los Amigos.
Where did that name come from?
From the hospital known as the Ranchos Los Amigos Hospital in California. And the real, I guess the only way I can really justify this out for you is to tell you that there is a specific population of patients who won't actually have a heel strike, or who may not get their foot flat. They may not have their heel come off. And they may not have a toe off either. And so the Ranchos Los Amigos said, we're not down for that. We're going to give this in more of timing nomenclature status. That way, we can be more accurate. It's like, did you ever do any measurements in centimeters before you got to PTA school? You measured everything in inches and feet, right? And then all of a sudden you get here and we're like, oh, we're going to do a circumferential measurement and we're going to do it in centimeters because it's more accurate. And that's just kind of the way you have to live your life, is saying, okay, we're going to do this. So, traditional terminology is anatomy. Ranchos Los Amigos is timing. Now, you're not done with Ranchos Los Amigos. You're going to get it again in rehab. Ms. Habde is going to talk to you about how it pertains to traumatic brain injuries. And you'll see it again there. So there's two versions of RLA. Just like there's two Borg scales. One is for perceived rate of exertion. One is for dysthymia. You have to know both. So, traditional, anatomy, stance phase. How much is the stance phase? 60%. Most of our time in the gait cycle is in stance phase. Don't fight it, just accept it. We're going to go through the traditional terminology first. The traditional terminology starts in stance phase with the heel strike. So come back up here and look at this. Now, any one of you can take, is anyone wearing brand new shoes today? Like straight out of the box? Anybody wearing like kind of new shoes? Anybody wearing some old shoes?
Mine are decent with you.
All right. Who's got the oldest shoes in here? Nobody's willing to take off their shoe because their feet stink.
I'll take my shoes though.
Well, I don't need new shoes. I need old shoes.
I got mine in July, so.
Been walking in them a lot?
Yeah.
Can I borrow one?
Sure.
And did you see what she did? She did what every American does. Hooks with the heel. And what we do is we pull And what we're doing is we're stretching out all those ligaments around our ankle. And then when we don't get it off the first time, what do? We stab it down. Oh. This shoe is warm.
Yeah.
Take a look. Do you see what I see? That sounds like a Christmas song going on here. What do you see? You see some wear? Where do you see wear? You see wear right there on the heel. It's very common for us to see that. And what does that tell us? That tells us this guy stripes right there. And you can see right where she hits. That's the initial contact. Oh wait, I just used another word. We'll get to that word here in a minute. This is where she puts her weight first on her foot. So, when we see the word heel strike, this is where the heel contacts the ground. Her heel strike is right there. Then we move to foot flat. Remember, these are anatomical terms. So she would hit here, and I'm guessing, and this is just like throwing out the scenario based off of what I would expect her to do. If she hits here kind of at lateral heel, she's going to start rolling in. Now think about this. I'm not going to put my hand in your shoe because I know you'd be weirded out by that. But like when she hits here, she will put her weight over her leg, right? And this is where we get into foot flat. But the foot gets flat before we get into full weight over the shoe or over the foot. That's called mid stance. So we have a foot flat, then we get into mid stance. Mid stance here, it says the body passes over weight bearing leg. That means the body is coming completely over that, right? Now this is pivotal because this also signals when the other leg is going to start swing phase. We'll get into that here in just a second. It says the heel leaves the ground on heel off just after. So, our shoe hit, we went into foot flat, we go into mid stance, then notice how the heel starts to come up. Right? That's called heel off. Again, an anatomy term, heel off. And then it ends here, stance phase ends with toe off. Pretty simple, right? Heel off, foot flat, mid stance. I'm sorry, I said heel off. Heel contact, or heel strike, foot flat, mid stance, heel off, toe off. Do you see it? And you're like, yeah, I got it. I've been walking for a lot of years, Kendall. I'm like, okay, that's fine.
So the time between foot flat and mid stance is really short?
Approximately 40% of the gait cycle, if you use their math. You follow that? Because that's what phase. Toe off the heel strike is swing phase. That's what you said, isn't it?
No, the between toe flat and mid stance?
Toe flat,
Foot flat.
Or foot flat, sorry.
foot flat, and mid stance is, you could even probably put a clock on. It's right there. I mean, it's whatever it takes for the foot to be flat, because see, as we walk, I will have my foot flat before I get to mid stance. And that's pretty critical because basically what I'm doing is I'm preparing this leg before I control my fall. Which is all I'm doing in the step. Is I'm getting my other leg in front of me before I fall. Alright? Now, strike, foot flat, mid stance, heel off, toe off. That signals that this right leg is going to move into our swing phase. Let's talk about it real quick. The swing phase, traditional terminology, when that toe comes off, listen, it's gotta get moving. In fact, we give it the term acceleration. And that's when the leg is behind the body and it's gotta catch up. Because guess what? What we learned in balance is that this leg right here has got to move quickly so that it can catch this falling body before it hits the ground. And I'm exaggerating those steps just a little bit. So, when we look at the swing phase, we say, oh, well, you've got to accelerate. You've got to get moving pretty quick. But you move, accelerate, mid-swing, and then guess what you do? You decelerate. The hamstrings have got to slow it down. But there's got to be some control, which is eccentric. Let me come back up here and talk about this one again. Ranchos Los Amigos. They have a similar state of terms. Instead of saying heel strike, foot flat, look at what it says. It says initial contact. So, this is her initial contact. And then instead of having foot flat, what does it say the term is? Loading response. So, the foot hits the ground. This is the initial contact. Is it a heel strike? Yes, it is. For her, it is. And then you have a loading response. From that loading response, look at what you get into. The same term, mid-stance. This is the only good news about the terminology differences, is mid-stance and mid-swing are consistent. So you have a loading response that accepts the weight. Mid-stance is the beginning, opposite foot leaves the ground, right? That's what we knew that from the previous statement where we saw that the swing phase was going to start on the opposite leg, and then it says its body is directly over the weight-bearing limb. Now that's a pretty critical thing, because mid-stance, my body should be moving over that, and my leg should be straight up and down. Terminal stance, what does the word terminal mean? The end. The end. It means it's ending. So, what do we know? We know that it started with the word initial. Initial means what?
Okay.
Beginning. Initial contact, terminal stance. That means it's going to end. It ends though, and this is critical. You guys have got to catch this. It ends, and then it starts something called pre-swing. Pre-swing says the beginning of initial contact and weight is shifted to the opposite leg and ends before the toes of weight-bearing leg leave the ground. So pre-swing, and we see this in the next slide, is identified, and there are 4 phases of swing in the swing phases. In the swing phase, I said that wrong. There are 4 aspects to the swing phase, as Ranchos Los Amigos says it. There are only 3 in tradition. So pre-swing is kind of out there in the intermediate area. But it's specific to RLA. Now, just so you can put some context on this, I have seen this question crop up a few times where they will pick on pre-swing because it's kind of like a stepchild. Pre-swing identified more here in this slide as being kind of the outlier. Where do you stick it? Well, it's pre-swing. It's the end of stance, and it's before swing starts. So it just sits in the middle. So to rule out all academic debates, we're going to leave it in the swing phase. They're not going to pick on you at licensure level about that. What they will do is want you to understand that swing phase is attached directly to, the pre-swing is directly attached to RLA terminology, and that it's part of the swing phase. Got it? That's right where the toes are about to leave the ground. That's our best definition for you.
And so are they actually timing these things? Is that why it's called timing?
No. Time as in temporally. Like the moment in time.
Oh, okay.
They're not stopped watching every second of this. What I'm saying is, where does it happen in time?
Is this meant to accommodate people with like a non-traditional gait?
It is, and we're going to see that in the next hour. We're going to look at abnormal gaits today. And so for normal people, or normal walking people, I should say, I don't think any people are normal. I'm not normal. This is what we would see right here. And this comes directly from your Kines text. And so you could look at this in chapter 22 in Kines. But what we have is we're starting on the right leg there, weight acceptance. They're also in double support. So you're going to see the symmetry of some terminology here. And this is just so you kind of have a baseline for understanding. You have your weight acceptance. You move to single limb support, and notice what's happening. You have heel strike, also known as what? Initial contact. You get foot flat, also known as
Floating.
the loading response. So it's responding to the load. That's all it's doing. It's responding to the load. And then you go into mid-stance. Now, take a look at mid-stance. Mid-stance did not change from RLA or traditional. It was the same thing. It's when the body is directly over the foot. But it needed two things to happen previous. It needed initial contact or heel strike, and then it needed foot flat or loading response. Then you get into mid-stance. Once mid-stance is complete, it moves into heel off. Now, RLA terminology does not call it heel off. It calls it terminal stance. What you need to look at and see is that's the end of the stance phase. The toes are about to leave the ground, which is identified as pre-swing. So it gives two names for that, right? And then you have toe off, heel off, toe off, swing phase. Swing phase is either acceleration, or what did RLA call the first part of swing phase? What does it say? Pre-swing and then initial swing. Where did we see initial before? On contact. So it's the beginning. So pre-swing comes before initial swing. And listen, I think you're all very incredibly intelligent people. But I think there's a licensure exam question waiting to trick you. Pay attention to the words. It is single-handedly the most critical thing you will do is reading comprehension on that test. Don't let these words get mixed up. Pre-swing, before the swing, initial swing. Pre comes before initial. That's a critical thing. Don't let that thing get messed up on your brain. So you start to accelerate. You then have mid-swing. Take a look at mid-swing. There's some things we're going to talk about today that mid-swing really, really has to have. Number one, I can look at the ankle and I can say, it better be dorsiflexing, or else what's going to happen? I'm going to drag my toe. right? So dorsiflexors, do they have to be strong? Yes, they do. Are they very commonly weak? Yes, they are. Does that change sometimes what people do when they initially contact? Yes, it does. It may mean that they don't heel strike. It may mean that they initially contact through the midfoot. That is why RLA exists. And then they have to slow it down. Right? They have to slow it down. Notice what the ankle's doing. Still dorsiflexing. But take a look here. The hip has some flexion, the knee has some flexion, then the hip has flexion and the knee has extension. And therefore your quads are important. Your glutes are important though. Because what if they failed right in here? That would be a big problem, right? So, remember how we did balance training? And we started off and we had people do longer quads. And then we went over to the counter and we had them do some hip abduction. We had them do some squats. We had them do some curls. And you're like, how is this balanced? It's balanced because it's incorporated in. They need that strength to accommodate the whole skill of balance. They need those same things to accommodate the skills associated with gait. And so we'll look at that later too. So, what are these things doing? Go down to that next slide. Take a look at it. Dorsiflexors, plantar flexors, knee extensors, knee flexors, hip extensors, trunk flexors, trunk extensors. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to start writing. What are they doing? On your piece of paper right there, I want to know. Stance phase, stance phase, stance phase, stance phase, swing phase. What are they doing? Jump on it. What are they doing?
Page 344, 345.
Alright, so while you're thinking here, what's happening with our plantar flexors right here? Let's just go straight into, they took by the way, what is that? What is this called right here?
Heel strike.
It's called a step. So they're taking a step, right? What's happening with those dorsiflexors? What are they doing? What kind of contraction?
Right, which one?
Wait, you gotta look up there. What is it? What are they doing? Are they eccentric right there? Noah says no. I'm about to go into heel strike / initial contact. What are they doing? They're what?
Is that not a dorsiflexor eccentric?
Are they concentric or are they isometric?
It's not isometric.
It's not isometric because there's no load.
It's concentric.
It's concentric. Then I go into heel strike. Now things are about to get nasty. I don't have any other way of doing this, so you're just gonna have to follow along. When they start to heel strike, what must happen out of those dorsiflexors? Eccentrically, they must control. Or what happens? I wore these shoes just for this purpose. Listen. I have weak dorsiflexion eccentrics. And guess what that gives me? Foot slap, foot slap, foot slap, foot slap, foot slap. So they have to have a concentric followed by an eccentric. And what does that do? That lowers that foot into, what's the second position? We have heel strike, also known as initial contact. Give me the next two names.
Foot flat.
Right. So foot flat, and then what else is it called?
Loading this.
The loading response. Now, here, what are the dorsiflexors doing? They get kind of quiet at that point. Let's jump over to the plantar flexors though. The plantar flexors, were they doing anything here? They were kind of quiet. Then when we get to here, guess what they start to do? Are they concentrically contracting? As that weight comes over, they have a little bit of stabilization. There is a load to them,
Isometric.
so it's isometric. But then, what's our next phase? Mid-stance. They're going to kind of have a little bit of an eccentric component right there. Prior to what? Because eccentric is stretching that muscle. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that though, and then, guess what they're going to do? Ryan, jump on it. They're going to concentrically contract to do what? Lift the heel. Their job. Right? Then they're going to finish it off, and then they're going to get quiet again. The dorsiflexors are going to come back in, neutral, stabilize the foot, and get it ready for what? As it concentrically contracts to start the phase over again. So there's our plantar flexors and our dorsiflexors. Now let's take a look at the next one. What are our knee extensors doing? What do you suppose the knee extensors are doing right there? What does it look like they're doing?
Extension.
It looks like they're extending, right? So what you're going to have to do is, you may not have pictures of this. You have to put this in your brain. This is what this looks like. As my leg comes forward, right? I'm about to step. This is where it really gets nasty for a student, because it's hard for me to keep continually naming the cycle, right? But this is a cycle, because boom, 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 boom. It just continues. So you got to think about it. How does this do this? Or how does this How do the extensors do this? They come in, they extend, but then what are they doing here? They're under load, so they're isometric. And then, what do? We're bringing in this aspect of our femur, the hamstrings and the glutes, to pull us through. In extension. Extension, do you see it? Right there? Then what happens? The extensors are quiet, the flexors are coming in. Talking about the knee here. We have some knee flexion, so the hamstrings are coming in. And then guess what? We have to bring in those hip extensors again, those hip flexors again, and the quads to get the swing phase moving again. So it's cyclic. It's going to continue to happen. Next, let's look at our hip flexors. Take a look at those hip flexors right there. They're very much concentric here. And then they kind of start to become eccentric. Concentric. We start here, and they're lengthening, right? And this is where your ability to discern eccentrics pays off, because it was concentric and now it's going to be eccentric as it turns into isometric under load. And then it's going to be eccentric here, concentric on the antagonistic side, which now is the glutes and the hamstrings, moving into extension right here. Then it's quiet again as the knee flexors pick that foot up and start to swing it again where it would be the inflection. How about our trunk flexors? You see the trunk flexors doing anything right there? About our trunk extensors, what do you see them doing?
Like they're both probably stabilizing.
They are stabilizing. Let me take you to this right here. This is on YouTube, so you can watch it all you want to. This hobby has it way back.